Hugely popular right now, Dungeon Crawler Carl is a lit RPG series, meaning a book or story that blends in elements from traditional role-playing games into a sci-fi or fantasy story. And since it's so popular, you've probably seen some things about it lately. Some people are over the moon for this. Some people think it's fart humor and sexism. Let's find out. One early morning, Carl, a late 20s marine mechanic / ex-Coast Guard guy, is attempting to wrangle his girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, who has climbed a tree at 2 in the morning and won't come down. And while he's trying to wrangle Donut, the world around him gets smushed. Literally, the world around him gets flattened, pulverized, squished into jelly. And worldwide, everyone who was inside a building at that moment is nowhere, really, anymore. Poof. Seeing as how it's winter in Seattle and Carl has no pants or shoes on, he heads down a nearby staircase at the behest of a mysterious message he receives. And by going down said staircase, Carl enters the game. And soon, Carl, along with Princess Donut, will be fighting for their lives. And that fight will be live streamed to the rest of the galaxy. Dungeon Crawler Carl does an excellent job of blending action RPG elements into a fun, fast-paced story. It feels like a traditional dungeon crashing RPG if it was mixed with the game show elements and the politics of The Running Man. But instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger, we get pre-Marvel Universe Chris Pratt or Danny McBride. I vote for Danny McBride, personally. As Carl progresses through the story, he gains levels, his skills increase. He has an absolutely massive inventory in which he can store items and recall items at his whim. He gets a lot of special achievements. And he encounters all types of monsters as he and Princess Donut, with some help from their tutorial guide Mordecai, traverse the levels of the world, killing bosses, grabbing loot, gaining experience, and hopefully surviving. Something like 14 million people enter level 1 from the surface, and by the time Carl and Donut are ready to head down to level 3, it's less than 1 million. It is a bloodbath. I thought the writing style had great pacing and was casual and fluid enough to be enticing to people who are not maybe traditional fantasy readers or are only kind of peripherally experienced with RPGs. And it would also probably hook people who just want to laugh a little and are looking for an exciting read. It's really very accessible. The world building is really great as we see different races and traps and enemies and bosses and just all kinds of the things that you would encounter within an RPG. Matt Dinniman has a very active imagination. A lot of the dialogue is pretty quotable and memorable, especially between Donut and Carl. It's full of huge action movie moments, and it's even sometimes funny. It's only sometimes funny. And now, comedy isn't a sure thing. Nobody is funny all of the time. And when Dungeon Crawler Carl works, it's a pretty good chuckle. But when it's not funny, it really isn't funny. Some of the biggest complaints I've seen about Dungeon Crawler Carl is that the humor is juvenile, and there's some misogyny and sexism, and even some racism at work here. Now, I am not the keenest observer of other people's moralistic shortcomings, but Dungeon Crawler Carl made some of them pretty noticeable, at least for me. The first one is that there is a very not funny special needs joke on page 69. And that set off some alarms for me and made me pay more attention than I might have otherwise. That was the only instance of that kind of humor that I noticed, directed specifically at the special needs community. But I want to make it very clear that I do not think that it's cool or funny to disparage people with intellectual or physical disabilities. There are a million other ways to be funny. Be better than that. I did encounter some very casual misogyny throughout the book, and I don't think that's so much like a guided hatred towards women as it is just a byproduct of the very strong bro humor that is prevalent in this book. This book is very bro humor. It is very carefully trying to recreate the vibe of a Friday night garage Dungeons and Dragons table session, and maybe it's doing that too well. Many, many, many of the attempted humorous moments in this book are related to women, female anatomy, sex with said female characters. Allow me, because I kept track. Maybe some very minor spoilers here, but I don't really think so. Carl goes on a talk show where the host is a crab monster with comically large breasts, and more than necessary attention is paid to them. When Carl gets items or achievements, they are often paired with some like stupid and sarcastic commentary, and one of those has the note, "Luck goes both ways, like your mom." He gets an achievement at one point along the lines of 2 chicks at once. Another one makes a reference that it's almost impossible for a West Virginia cheerleader to make it to her 18th birthday as a virgin. There are some enemies that are little fairy women that look like humans, but they have bob haircuts and run multi-level marketing schemes. One of the monsters is called a Kraken, which is like a kraken and a Karen, and instead of suckers on its tentacles, it has mouths. Another NPC in the game is an Icelandic woman who's going with like a Viking warrior vibe, and she gets some armor that is more at home in a harem than it is on the battlefield. And I know that's just kind of like a video game trope, but he chose to include it. He encounters a friendly female goblin shaman who straight up propositions him for sex. There's an old woman who remarks that she'd let Carl feel her up. They encounter a level boss who is just an enormous, obese Hispanic woman. And there are others. These are just the ones that I wrote down. Maybe this is nothing and I'm just overanalyzing bro humor. Who knows? But it happened enough that I was paying attention to it. I just don't think that humor necessarily has to come at the expense of women. There are a lot of ways to be funny. There is also a very long-winded and tired foot fetish joke that hangs over the entire book, and that was funny like once. All of that aside, Dungeon Crawler Carl is actually a lot of fun, and if you can grit your teeth, or maybe even what I mentioned doesn't bother you, then I think you're going to have a good time, because I think the story is actually pretty good. There's not a lot of character development, but Carl and Princess Donut are a fun pair to hang out with. Their dialogue is memorable, and I like spending time with them for the most part. And it was cool to see the mechanics of the game kind of become like a character unto itself. And if nothing else, the action scenes of the book are worth it alone. I'm not in a hurry to continue this series, but I probably will. Dungeon Crawler Carl gets 3.5 out of 5 hammers.